My dear friends, dear listeners, very good morning to you all. A rainy day in Madrid, by the way. I speak as Secretary General of the Spanish think tank INCIPE, which is an independent think tank that is devoted to foreign affairs and which is based in Madrid. In that capacity, let me introduce our speaker of today, Professor Alexei Gromyko, who is joining us from Moscow. This is our third talk of our cycle on Russia, a series which was opened last May 26th by the ambassador of Russia to Spain, Mr. Korchagin, and that was followed by a leading Spanish scholar, Carmen Claudin. Professor Gromyko, our speaker of today, is a very distinguished scholar himself. He's presently the director of the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Sciences. But he's also president of the Russian Association of European Studies and member of the Research Council, both at the Russian Security Council and at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among other leading roles in foreign policy institutions in Russia. On top of that, Professor Gromyko is editor-in-chief of the journal Contemporary Europe and executive editor of the journal Social Sciences and Contemporary World. And not to be too long, let me just add that he is an associate visitor at St. Anthony's College at Oxford University. So it's a real honor for us to be able to listen to such a prominent Russian personality to tell us about his view of Russia and Europe. And that at a very important moment, just the day after that President Putin and President Biden met in Geneva. And without further ado, let me give the floor very briefly to our Director General, the Director General of INCIPE, Vicente Garrido, who will give us the terms of reference of this talk. And then Vicente will give you the floor, Professor Gromyko. So to you, Vicente, you have the floor.
So thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much also to Professor Gromyko for having accepted our invitation to participate in this cycle on Russia. Well, just to remember for those people that participate in this event for the first time, the procedure will be as usually. You have to post your questions to the YouTube chat, if possible in English, because this event will be conducted today in English without translation. If everyone has problem in writing in English, well, as an exception, can also submit the questions in Spanish and we'll translate it. We have also received some questions through the chat, through the email. But please, if possible, submit this through the YouTube chat. I should also remember the hashtag for today's event, Grandes Potencias Rusia in Spanish. And please don't wait until the very last moment, because, well, the procedure will be also, as usually, Professor Gromyko will speak for a period not superior to 25 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions, and we will close this possibility to submit your question 5 minutes before this event ends today. Well, thank you very much, Professor Gromyko, and, well, please, we are expecting your assessment and your intervention on today's topic.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful to the INCIPE and to Professor Vicente Garrido and to His Excellency Manuel Alabar for making this meeting possible. Of course, I appreciate the possibility to speak on the EU-Russia relations and to share with you some of my thoughts. Of course, the topic is very multifaceted and very rich. And let me start with a few words on the international context of the relationship between Russia and the European Union. In the times before COVID-19, the fundamental problems that caused the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 had not been resolved. Now, this is quite a commonplace to say that the pandemic further exacerbated the situation. In 2020, global economy was hit by two simultaneous shocks with both supply and demand dropping dramatically, and enormous amount of money has been pumped into the economy to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, at the same time ignoring the fact that this leads to mounting public debts and financial bubbles. The geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China increases, no matter who is the occupant of the White House in Washington. The process of strategic decoupling between the United States and Europe will continue in spite of all the rhetoric. And the main reason is, of course, China. On the whole, systemic and structural changes in international relations and in the mechanisms of global and regional governance carry on the trends of previous years and even decades. The pandemic spurred a resurgence of the debate about a proper balance between security and civil freedoms. The changes taking place in connection with the pandemic, from my point of view, follow the logic of the general shift towards a polycentric world order. Of course, at this point in time, it is still hard to tell which model of polycentrism will emerge as the dominant one, and what a new hierarchy of countries will look like. Rivalries among the world's top nations, and not only top nations, has got even more intense as a result of the pandemic. And this, of course, complicates the ability of specialists in foreign relations, to forecast what is going to happen in 5 or 10 years' time. As tensions between various centers of power rise, Russia, from my point of view, should remain deeply involved in global affairs, but at the same time, it should remain autonomous in its decision-making, not to be trapped in the narrative of the new US-China bipolarity. At the same time, Russia, as a power with global responsibilities, being a permanent member of the UN Security Council, should be very persistent in handling cleverly its differences with the European Union and the United States in order to escape an equally dangerous narrative of a new Cold War, so-called new Cold War. Well, the state of affairs in the relationship between Russia and the European Union is dismal, no doubt. Probably it is in its worst shape since the end of the Cold War. And the reasons are many. The list of mutual recriminations seems without any limit, and complaints and finger pointing, of course, are abound. So let me not waste our time in listing these numerous accusations and counter accusations. One way to explain this situation is to proclaim the objective nature of the present standoff and accept that it is given and intractable, and do nothing. But from my point of view, the situation is not natural, not normal. It runs counter to common sense, not to mention, well, professional assessment. It is my belief that economically, culturally, technologically, and even politically, there are much fewer fundamental cleavages between Russia and the European Union than these days many people believe. In recent years, differences between the two sides have been much exaggerated due to domestic politics, geopolitical tensions, or economic selfishness. Russia and the European Union were not mentally inept or adolescent when for a significant period of time they pursued the policy of strategic engagement and even partnership. And let me remind us that this strategy was buttressed by strong economic investment, security reasons, and also by a dense fabric of institutions. Well, unfortunately, even challenges of international terrorism or the current pandemic have not reversed the trend. Moreover, the opposite is true. Relations have been only deteriorating. So, what went wrong? From my point of view, there are several explanations. The one is the state of world politics, which in the past years have been working not so much on convergence, but on divergence of regional and global players. By now, decouplings of different sorts and kinds is widespread. One more explanation is the way the European Union applies the principle of solidarity. I understand perfectly well how important this principle is, and by the way, not just to the European Union. However, from my point of view, it is counterproductive to devalue this principle, to something what we may call esprit de corps, to the lowest common denominator. For example, quite often Russians hear from the EU colleagues that it takes two to tango. But there are 27 members of the European Union. And I think that for Russia, it will always be impossible to tango with all of them at once, unless the European Union becomes a state. So in my opinion, when for domestic or other reasons, one of the EU member states make allegations against Russia, then to express solidarity, with such actions as a knee-jerk reaction and without any meaningful dialogue on what happened is to weaken the meaning of solidarity, not to strengthen it. So this is just not fair play. The European Union was irritated by the results of Josep Borrell's visit to Moscow and by Russia's sanctions on David Sassoli and others. the main part of Borrell's visit was diplomatic talks, which were satisfactory as both sides recognized. But, the media focused on the press conference, which in the European Union was interpreted by many in negative way. And let me remind us that Borrell had been heavily criticized even before the visit. So, from my point of view, a certain part of the European Union, those who do not want improvements in relations with Russia in any circumstances, jumped, at this opportunity to lambast Borrell even for something which he didn't do. On sanctions, the EU's fury is difficult to explain in rational terms. Just let me recall that the speakers of both Russia's houses of parliament, Valentina Matvienko and Vyacheslav Volodin, are under sanctions now for several years, as well as other dozens, of Russian parliamentarians, including Kosachev, Pushkov, several ministers, Anatoly Antonov, now Russian ambassador in the United States, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the armed forces of Russia, who is the main point of contact for Sakha, Dmitry Kozak, the main Russian negotiator on Donbass. And by the way, yesterday, Antonov, Gerasimov, and Kozak were in Geneva. And for a long time, Russia was reluctant to respond to the EU sanctions against its parliamentarians and other people. If it had been willing, to use any possibility to escalate tensions with the European Union, then Sassoli or his predecessor and others would have been sanctioned by Russia several years ago, not in 2021. And by the way, China in this regard does not have any, complexes, or second thoughts. As soon as it was sanctioned recently by the European Union, they replied the next day. Keeping in mind the current situation in relations between Russia and the European Union, this is my opinion, we need ripples from pebbles cast into a pond. Well, in other words, we need small steps and incremental changes to try to achieve the escalation. Let me borrow the notion of a tail chase from the military vocabulary. It means a military target and a vehicle pursuing it in order to destroy. For example, in case of intercontinental ballistic missiles, it is very difficult to tail chase them. So I would say that some of the geopolitical missiles were already being launched, inflicting huge damage to the relationship between Russia and the European Union, Russia and NATO, Russia and the United States, and there is nothing what we can do. But those who are willing to improve relations can use their energy and ability for something doable in the EU-Russia interaction. They should try, to prepare some ground for a day after. At present, I do not see an immediate significant potential to reignite the EU-Russia relations from within. But there are some rays of hope coming from outside. First is the Putin-Biden's summit, which had been preceded by the Lavrov-Blinken talks in Reykjavik in May. And yesterday we saw how the two leaders interacted in Geneva in quite a responsible way and in the public interests of their countries. Extremely important is the joint statement on strategic stability, in which Putin and Biden repeated the famous Gorbachev-Reagan proclamation that the nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. But at the same time, of course, there are formidable obstacles on the road to normal relations. But I believe that yesterday first steps were made in the right direction. And these steps, can engender more goodwill and more appetite for further progress, especially if there are some tentative achievements within the next, say, 6 months. And it remains to be seen how the Geneva Factor is going to influence the EU summit later this month, in June, on a strategy towards Russia, and how the Geneva Factor can be reflected in the strategic compass process in the European Union. And one more ray of hope is a possible summit of the P5, of the permanent members of the Security Council. The summit, which now is, well, a bit more likely, more likely than before due to a moderate success in Geneva. But of course, we should keep in mind that yesterday the P5 was not mentioned. Yesterday it was purely, well, a bilateral occasion. But if it goes well, then the bilateral dynamic between Russia and the United States may spill over to some, multilateral formats. So if we presume that the P5 summit takes place this or next year, then the two more European countries besides China may be involved in deliberations on the prospects of strategic stability. And now in the conclusion, back to the pebbles which Russia and the European Union can cast into a pond. Well, I think that Russia and the European Union can use Moscow's chairmanship in the Arctic Council to promote a positive agenda. 6 members of the European Union are observers in this important international organization. So there are, there are ways to work jointly on some positive points. Unfortunately, yesterday we did not hear a word from Biden on the Open Skies Treaty. As you know, Russia had been waiting since January this year to give the United States more time to define its approach to the treaty, which Donald Trump left in November last year. And many European states last year urged Washington not to leave the OST, and later they urged Russia to stay in the treaty. But unfortunately, recently, the US officially informed Moscow that they were not going, to try to resume their membership in the treaty. So Putin had nothing to do but to sign a decree on the Russia's withdrawal. Now the notification from Russia should be sent to Hungary and Canada, the depository nations, and then 6 months are required to complete the withdrawal procedure. So we'll see if there are any forks in the road, then Russia and the European Union can try to use the EU Green Deal strategy in order to try to find some common ground, in a mutually beneficial way, instead of letting the Green Deal to become one more bone of contention. Then Russia's role in the future of the Iran nuclear deal and in the future of Afghanistan can be points of convergence between Russia and the European Union. One more idea is to reestablish practical dialogue between Russia and the European Union, in some innovative ways. For example, a hotline between the Russian Prime Minister and a head of state, which holds the presidency of the European Union. And my last point, member states of the European Union, which at the same time are members of NATO, can take onto themselves, more responsibility to work with Russia on a moratorium on the ground-based intermediate and short-range nuclear missiles in Europe. In September, just to remind us that in September 2019, when the US left the treaty, the INF, Moscow put forward several proposals which later were developed. And Russia is committed to the moratorium on the non-deployment in Europe, including not just in Kaliningrad, but in the European part of Russia, of ground-based intermediate and short-range missiles. By the way, both nuclear and conventional, unless this class of weapons is not deployed by the United States or NATO. And my very last point is to expand 1.5 and second track diplomacy. For example, it can be done under the auspices of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the High Representative of the European Union, Foreign Policy and Security Policy. So some pebbles cast into a pond. I hope that there are that this list is much longer. What can be done even in these circumstances, but on this point, let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gromyko. You have broadly and in a comprehensive way referred to the yesterday's summit talks between President President Biden and President Putin. And we have for sure received a lot of questions on this issue, especially not only far away from how this event that has also shown the differences between the two states could influence to some extent to the relation between Russia and Europe in a positive way. You have referred also to this point, but far away from the significance of the yesterday's meeting in Geneva, and far away from the some specific topics to which you have referred, especially arms control and missile defense. How can you foresee some possibilities to enhance, to improve relations between Russia and Europe, and especially the European Union?
You mean in the light of the summit in Geneva? Yes.
Yes.
Well, it seems to me that the factor of the United States in the foreign policy of most member states of the European Union and in the common foreign policy of the European Union, the US factor, well, is very important, to put it mildly. As I mentioned in my talk, if there are improvements and tangible shifts in the relations and interaction between Russia and the European Union, then the spillover effect may emerge. The Europeans, I'm sure, yesterday were following very closely what happened in Geneva. As I mentioned, the joint statement on strategic stability was signed, which repeats the Gorbachev-Reagan's dictum. And Russia and the United States are going to launch at least 2 tracks of consultations in the following days. Well, maybe there will be more tracks, but what both Biden and Putin highlighted yesterday, they put an emphasis on 2 tracks. One are talks on the future of strategic stability, but we know quite well that the future of strategic stability cannot, stay bilateral. I do not think that in 5 years' time there will be a new START treaty just on the bilateral basis between Moscow and Washington, although it is possible. But the probability is high that the future of strategic stability will be worked out in multilateral format. So P5, the P5 format, I think, will be very important. And France and the United Kingdom, the European states, by all means, should be included sooner or later in this format. Well, then the United States and Russia are going to launch consultations between specialists on cyber security. And this is something what is hugely important, not just for Russia, the United States, but for the European Union. So it seems to me that Europeans are going to be involved as well. And as I mentioned in the talk, there are some points which yesterday were discussed, like Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Libya. In all these places, the European Union has its own interest, or even in some cases is a stakeholder, or, for example, on the talks between Israel and Palestinians in the quartet. So it seems to me that due to the fact that we have a very dramatic situation on the bilateral track between Russia and the European Union, and on the bilateral track between Russia and the United States, if there are some points of convergence which can take the 3 heights of this triangle closer to each other, to see how the national interests of these 3 parties can overlap on strategic security, on the Arctic, on climate change, on regional conflicts, then I think that we can have a moderate success in the next, not weeks, not months, but in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much. Also, in the line of this assessment of this topic, although we have doing speculations about the what was included and what wasn't in the yesterday's agenda. We have also a couple of questions relating to the role for achieving this strategic stability between Russia and the United States of the Chinese nuclear weapons, or Chinese nuclear efforts in modernizing the nuclear capabilities. Was this topic in the agenda, and to what extent Chinese nuclear modernization program plays also this that it's a very important or not matter for in the relations between the United States and Russia?
Thank you. As far as I remember, yesterday China was not mentioned neither by Biden or Putin. It was mentioned in a couple of questions during their press conferences, but it seems to me that China was not a point in their talks. And it is quite logical, because yesterday they were focused on bilateral agenda. But of course, China is going to be a very important factor in the future of relations between Russia and the European Union, Russia and the United States. As to strategic stability, let me recall that according to assessment of Pentagon, China has about 250 warheads. And the United States and Russia have between 1,400, 1,500 deployed warheads. And if we take all warheads, then the figures are much higher. So China still is in the second league. But at the same time, China is developing very quickly in military terms. And the United States is very concerned. You remember how in the years of Trump, the United States were pushing Russia for a doubtful reason. They were pushing Russia to involve China in trilateral talks, which Russia did not do, because it is up to Beijing, to say when it is ready to join other military superpowers in talks on strategic stability. But I think that sooner or later China will join. But then the question of France and the UK will be raised, because, the nuclear arsenal of China, France, and the UK are comparable. And if China is involved, then why not France and the United Kingdom? And of course, for the United States, it is very important, to do something from their point of view, not to let Moscow and Beijing to become even closer than they are now. In Washington, many people think that something similar to what Kissinger and Nixon did in the beginning of the 1970s can be done now, but in a opposite way. To try, somehow to mend fences with Russia this time, in order to concentrate on China. From my point of view, this is a big miscalculation, misperception. Russia and China are going to proceed with their strategic plans, including in political military sphere. it seems to me that to draw a wedge in the relationship between Russia and China in the foreseeable future will not be possible. So just to conclude that from the Russia's point of view, the China factor is very important, and this factor should be taken into account in the future of strategic stability, and moreover in the future, of balance of power in a polycentric world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gromyko. Going now to the sanctions chapter, we have received also a couple of questions through the email. In the past month, both the United States and Europe have applied sanctions to Russia, but Russia has also applied countervailing sanctions to the United States and to Europe. Do you think these confrontational times will soon lead to more collaborative times?
Indeed, sanctions is a very important and intractable, to some extent, issue. Not a single time Russia initiated, any rounds of sanctions. So in all occasions that were counter sanctions. The problem is that, firstly, Russia do not consider this kind of sanctions, the sanctions of the European Union or of the United States, as legal, because sanctions should be imposed by the Security Council of the United Nations. Russia thinks, and this is also my point of view, that sanctions, at least when they are applied to Russia, are not going to achieve any goals. For example, Cuba was under sanctions and still is under sanctions for dozens of years, but even a tiny country has managed to, withstand them. In case of Russia, with its potential and resources, it is clear that sanctions are not going to change, the foreign policy, or as in the West they say, the behavior of Russia. One more point is that sanctions are imposed for certain reasons. The overwhelming opinion in Russia is that the reasons for which this or that sanctions have been imposed on Russia were just wrong. The reasons were geopolitical. The reasons had nothing to do what happened on the ground, be it Syria, be it Ukraine, be it cyber space, etc., etc. So it seems to me that sanctions is something what is quite easy to introduce, but very, very difficult to withdraw. And if we have, some moderate success in the next couple of years in defining some overlapping spheres of interest between our sides, then still that would probably be not enough to start withdrawing, lifting sanctions. Sanctions is something what will persist till a very late point in time, when really we have not just some incremental positive changes, but some breakthroughs. Unfortunately, from my point of view, firstly, that was a strategic mistake of the European Union and the United States in imposing many rounds of sanctions on Russia. And by the way, most countries in the world did not follow them. And even some very close allies to the United States, for example, like Japan. Japan joined the United States in the first round of sanctions back in 2014. Since then, Japan has not introduced a single round of sanctions. And now there are more than 40 rounds of sanctions from the United States, a bit less from the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We received another question in Spanish by Army General Argumosa in the reserve, and it's about the position or intention of Russia to the expectation for the support of political and military support for the Eastern Ukrainian separatists in Ukraine, and if you foreseen some evolution on this about the political and military support that General Argumosa is asking for.
Thank you for the question. Yesterday, as we know from Putin and Biden, they touched upon the Ukrainian issue, and we know that the Minsk agreements were mentioned. They were mentioned as the sole basis for the solution of the Ukrainian crisis. So due to the fact that we have nothing instead of Minsk agreements, and nothing better is going to emerge if we let them, to be scrapped, then we should follow what was signed by several states, several political leaders of states, including by Poroshenko. And just to recall that the Minsk agreements were enshrined, were embedded in one of the Security Council's resolutions. So these are just the Minsk agreements is not just a treaty between several states, Now this is a part of the international law. There is a torturous process going on now for several years in the contact group. The Steinmeier formula, which Ukraine promised to not just to support, but to put into life. Still, this formula does not work. In summer last year, all the sides reached an agreement for ceasefire, and one of the pivots of this, the ceasefire along the contact line in Donbass, one of the pivots of this agreement was to deprive local military commanders along the contact line to give orders to shoot, so that this right to give orders will be given just to the central military authorities in Kiev and in Donbass. So in Lugansk and Donetsk, very quickly they did it. They issued orders. They published them, which deprive local commanders in Donbass to give orders to shoot. In Ukraine, they at first supported this idea, but later on they changed their mind. So on the Ukrainian side, still a right to give orders to shoot is with the local commanders. But there is quite a motley crew of military units on the Ukrainian side, which are deployed next to the contact line in Donbass. Some of them, are subordinated de facto not to the Ministry of Defense, but to the Ministry of Interior, and battalions like Azov and others. They can take decisions on their own, and with their reputation, this is nothing what in these circumstances can be done to make them stop firing, not just in reply, but in order to provoke. So there are hundreds of small and bigger things which deprive the members of the Norman format to make any significant progress. But just to conclude, it seems to me that if there are some tangible progress in relations between Russia and the United States, then we can have again a spillover effect with respect to the Ukrainian crisis. So let's see. But at present, the situation is in a stalemate. And from my point of view, Russia is not responsible for this stalemate. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have received much more questions about climate change, about Venezuela, but I will center my last question regarding your today's title for this presentation. One question, maybe the final question with two dimensions. It's related to maybe, in your opinion, is there any credibility left in Russia for the European Union political project? And also close to this, in order to conclude, in relation with your title for your presentation, also someone asked here, is the tree flexible enough to be claimed down? Because your presentation is how to claim down the tree together.
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, when there is a crisis in any relationship, this is a two-way street. How to manage it, how to manage the instability, and how to find common ground to resolve this crisis. So it seems to me that both Russia and the European Union now find themselves on a high tree. Nobody wants to lose their face, but at the same time they are so high on the tree that it is dangerous, just to jump down. there is a very clear understanding in Russia that the situation is not normal. On many occasions, the politicians, not to mention specialists, have been saying that Russia is ready to normalize relations on the basis, of mutual respect, on the basis of national interests of all sides. From our European partners and specialists, I heard many times that yes, normalization is much better than what we have at present. But we have now such a difficult situation inside the European Union. We should solve so many problems that please do not push us to focus our attention on the on improving relations with Russia, because this is a very contentious point. This is something what we quarrel with each other. So this is not a ripe time for the European Union, to tackle this problem. But at the same time, it is clear that even in the European Union, there are many and probably most who publicly or talking to themselves think that sooner or later something should be done. And even the United States now, under Biden, clearly says that the situation is not normal, that we should do something. Where we are going to keep pushing Russia, but we should do something together with Russia. So I hope very much that the strategic compass process in the European Union, what is going to be said and decided during the next US summit, where the issue of strategy towards Russia is going to be discussed, that more balanced and unbiased approach will emerge, so that we have not just Mogherini 5 principles, which are not a strategy, but it is tactics reflecting a certain period of time in history. And as to the credibility of Russia, well, the credibility of the European Union and of the United States in Russia are very low. You may say that the credibility of Russia in the European Union and Russia is low as well. So this is something what is not a point of recriminations, but this is a point which is a good basis to say that our relations are at a very low point, that we do not trust each other, but there is a very practical and strategic understanding that this is not a new norm, that a lot of global and regional projects are not going to be resolved if we just keep drifting apart. And it seems to me that the momentum to accumulate this perception that there are ways to escape this stalemate, this momentum is getting stronger. So let's see what is going to happen, and those who are willing, let's try to contribute to buttress this momentum.
Thank you so much again for your very comprehensive presentation, and for also to all the participants today for the questions. And now, fortunately, we have arrived to the end 1 hour promised time. Let me now give the floor to the Secretary General of INCIPE, Ambassador Manuel Alabar, to conclude this event today to announce the next one the next week. So thank you very much, Professor Gromyko. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Alexei Gromyko, for your most interesting talk that has arisen lots of questions. You have dealt with many problems, and there's a lot of things you've said which I think are extremely interesting, at least from the point of view of a Spanish listener. I am heartened by your opinion that this summit Biden-Putin of yesterday was a step in the right direction. And although you said it was a moderate success, only moderate, but a success nonetheless, and those effects will be seen, perhaps not immediately, as you said, but in the next couple of years. I think that if that is true, we'll all live in a safer world. I thought very interesting your remarks on this triangular relationship between China, Russia, and the US, and how one of the bilateral relationship in this triangle can affect the triangle as a whole. I think that's extremely interesting. I was also interested in your opinion on sanctions, whether they are useful to change the behavior of the country which is sanctioned. And then also you said that, and you're probably right, that it's extremely difficult to lift those sanctions once they're imposed. And that takes that into a logic of a permanent problem in the relationship. They are difficult to change. Those three, among many other opinions of yours, which I think will give us food for thought in the coming time. So thank you very much, Professor Gromyko, for your talk, which is going to have a following next Wednesday, June 23. We are going to have the pleasure to have also from Moscow, Igor Ivanov as our speaker. Igor Ivanov, as many of our viewers know, was Russian ambassador in Spain for a few years, and then for 6 years, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Russia. So he will talk to us at 12 hours noon in Spain, 13 hours Moscow times. And Professor Ivanov, because of the many years he spent in Spain, will speak to us, if I'm not mistaken, in Spanish. So that will be our next talk. So again, Professor Gromyko, thank you very much. INCIPE will always be open to you, and we hope to have you in this time of 2 years. You said the world will improve because of the summit Biden-Putin of yesterday. Just before that, I hope we will have you here back again. Thank you very much.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
All the best.